We have been covering the Flint water crisis and cover up for years. I've been covering it for years. Jen has been covering it as well for years. I've been to Flint since 2016, nearly 20 times. I think I'm at 18 trips. We have broken massive stories, including 2 months ago, where our investigative reporting broke that top officials in former Republican Governor Rick Snyder's administration erased their phones shortly before the launch of the criminal investigation into Flint. They deleted messages on their phones from the period that Flint was using the Flint River. Snyder himself obstructed justice, refused to hand over key documents to criminal prosecutors. The story is right at the top of my Twitter. If you've never read it, Colin, if you could find it, to just put it up on screen. Bottom line, we proved destruction of evidence, tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice. Nothing. Crickets from the media. Congress responded to it. The House Oversight Committee, they issued a scathing statement in response to our story against Governor Snyder. They said they were going to investigate it. Well, I followed up with Congress, and they have basically done jack shit. I have followed up with them over and over again. If you could click on the story too, Colin. I have followed up with them over and over again. How's your investigation? Are you going to call Governor Snyder back in there? Since we proved that his administration, from the top levels of the health department, the environmental department, deleted their phones right before the launch of the criminal investigation, erased all of their messages from 2014 through 2015. That was when Flint used the Flint River. Kind of, if you're investigating who knew what when, you'd want to know who was talking and what were they saying in these 18 months that residents were going, holding up jugs of brown water and crying with rashes on their body and losing their hair and begging the Snyder administration to help. You'd kind of want to know, what were the officials talking about during that time? But even more insulting throughout all this was the fact that Governor Snyder, while he was governor, and a lot of his state officials, Governor Snyder's, by the way, his net worth is $220 million. Yes, $220 million is Governor Snyder's net worth. But throughout the time he was governor, the state of Michigan and Flint residents, so Michigan and Flint residents, paid for the governor's criminal defense attorneys up to $8.5 million. The state of Michigan paid for Governor Snyder's criminal defense attorneys. And the whole time he said, I'm not even being investigated. I didn't do anything. Well, you wonder why he would need $8.5 million in criminal defense fees, because he was being investigated. We broke that the original Flint water investigation, which went on for 3 years from 2016 through 2019, before the Democratic Attorney General of Michigan cleaned house and fired the team that had what they were building a case against Snyder for involuntary manslaughter. The Democratic Attorney General comes in, she fired them all. She cleaned house, started brand new for some reason that nobody really knows, and then she charged Snyder with a misdemeanor. So one prosecution was going to were building a case. They weren't ready to charge him, but they were building a case towards involuntary manslaughter. Sources indicate they were 75% of the way there in building a case against him for involuntary manslaughter. A Democrat comes in, cleans house, drops all the charges against 8 top state officials, recharges them later with lesser charges in some cases. So drops charges against certain people who were being charged with financial fraud related to the Flint water crisis, because this was really a privatization scheme and fraud that led to the water crisis. And then when she recharged those people, mysteriously missing were the financial charges. Isn't that interesting? So one investigation is going for bond fraud and is charging state officials with financial crimes. The Democratic Attorney General comes in, poof, it's all gone. Drop those financial charges, recharge people with lesser charges. Why would they drop the financial charges? Maybe because the Flint water crisis, underneath it all, there was a fraudulent financial deal to put Flint on a brand new water pipeline that was completely unnecessary. And the financial deal that led to that was fraudulent. Flint was broke. It legally wasn't even allowed to borrow more money because it was nearly bankrupt. And it was already at its borrowing limit. So a fraudulent financial deal was created. And the provisions in that deal allowed Flint to borrow more money to join this completely unnecessary water pipeline. And while that water pipeline was being built, that Flint was going to join, while it was under construction, they said, let's put Flint on the Flint River, which had been General Motors and other corporate polluters had dumped their waste into for 100 years. And, we just won't add the proper chemicals into the Flint River water when we switch Flint to the Flint River. We're not going to add corrosion control chemicals, even, which are added into almost all cities in America's water system, because all of our pipes underneath us are 50 to 100 years old. So you have to add corrosion control chemicals, phosphates, to prevent to prevent lead from the pipes the water travels through leaching into the water. They didn't add those. So already insulting enough, the state of Michigan residents and Flint residents who were poisoned by this man, Snyder, whose poisoning happened under his watch, that our reporting has already exposed. He knew about it while they were drinking toxic water and helped cover it up while they were drinking toxic water. He did not publicly notify them and tell your children to stop drinking the water. So those residents have been on the hook to pay $8.5 million in criminal defense funds for this governor. Well, let's fast forward to today, Colin. I mean, it's just unbelievable. A state of Michigan board approves up to $2.3 million in Flint legal contracts for Governor Snyder and Jared Egan, who was his chief of staff while he was governor. A state board on Tuesday approved up to $2.3 million in contracts for the defense of former state officials being prosecuted in connection with the Flint water crisis. The contracts approved by the state administrative board include and up to $1.45 million contract with Warner, Norcross, and Judd for the defense of Republican former Governor Rick Snyder, and up to $835,000 contract with Dickinson Wright for the defense of Jared Egan, former communications director and chief of staff for Snyder. Jared Egan, by the way, was the former, I think he was communications director for Pence when he was vice president. Warner, Norcross, and Judd declined comment through a spokesperson. The other law firm declined comment. The state also has entered into contracts for former Department of Health and Human Services Director Nick Lyon, former Chief Medical Executive Eden Wells, and former DHHS employee Nancy Peeler for their legal defense in the Flint water prosecutions. The amount of the contracts for Lyon, Wells, and Peeler was not immediately clear. The state-financed defense costs for Snyder, Egan, and others have been a subject of controversy under the initial investigation of Republican Attorney General Bill Schuette and under current Democratic Attorney General Dana Nessel, amid rising defense and prosecution costs and frustration from residents for paying for both sides of the litigation. Through April 2019, the total expenditures related to Flint legal costs to law firms came in at $25 million. Quote, soon after taking office, the Whitmer administration realized it inherited dozens of legal defense contracts responsible for millions of dollars in spending that lacked meaningful cost controls and a uniform system of contract management. Whitmer's office capped state employee defense costs in January at much lower rates than had been used previously during the Schuette investigation in an attempt to curb spending on the case. Whitmer's January policy would have capped hourly fees at $225 an hour and imposed a budget ceiling of $175,000. So let me get this straight for a second. Colin, I don't know if you're good at math. I'm not good at math. So Governor Snyder, under his administration, the residents of Flint, I'm actually going to get out my calculator right now. The residents of Flint were on the hook for $8.5 million. Now we're adding, let me get the number, 1.45. 1.45. Almost $10 million. $10 million. Michigan residents, and more importantly, the impoverished, poisoned residents of Flint are paying for a man worth $220 million. Rick Snyder is worth. That's his net worth. They are paying for this governor who covered up a deadly waterborne bacteria that was in that water. He knew about it as we broke this story with The Intercept. He knew about it 16 months earlier than he testified under oath to Congress. He knew that there was an increase in deadly Legionnaire's disease, which is a waterborne bacteria. It can be misdiagnosed often as pneumonia. It's much more deadly than pneumonia. It killed, the number is really untold in Flint, how many people died from Legionnaires. He knew about it. And we proved, because we got a hold of his phone records from October 2014 that showed him, his chief of staff, and his health director 6 months after Flint switched to the Flint River, and just a few weeks before his reelection for governor in 2014. So we're talking 7 years ago, that him and his chief of staff and health director were on the phone 22 times over 2 days. 22 times over 2 days. At the same exact time that Snyder's health department and environmental department were going back and forth about the increase in Legionnaire's cases in Flint. And one of Snyder's top environmental officials was telling the health department, do not release this to the public. Do not make a public notification to residents of Flint about the increase in Legionnaire's disease. Yeah, don't tell them they're drinking toxic water that could kill them, could kill their children.